Walrus always seemed to be making waves. He enjoyed being with the herd, but he had difficulty being like the herd. His tusks had not developed in the same manner as other walruses. They turned inward and weren't very big. The tusks of a walrus are an extremely important part of his or her identity, and bigger is always better. A large set of tusks is a sign of power. As a young calf, Walrus didn't care about the difference in his tusks. He only wanted to play with the other walruses. Sometimes the parents of his friends would discourage their calves from playing with Walrus. They didn't want their children to accept someone so different. They didn't want their children to become the weaker members of the herd. Walrus could also use his vocal cords to make the most penetrating sounds, which he could project far across the land and sea. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciated his unusual vocal skills.
"Can't you keep him quiet?"
barked the largest of the herd. His name was Mighty Tusks, and he didn't think that such a young and small-toothed walrus should possess such extraordinary abilities. "He's just exercising his vocal cords as the other calves do," answered Mother Walrus in a defensive yet explanatory manner. She understood the order of the herd and knew the important social position which Mighty Tusks held. But she also had a great deal of love for her son and knew in her heart that his differences were also what made him unique.
"Well, he is annoying me with his strange ways of barking and whistling," Mighty Tusks growled with contempt. "Nobody else in the herd can make sounds that fill the entire sky. Not even the largest and strongest among us has those abilities."
"He's special," Mother Walrus said protectively. "What he lacks in the size of his tusks, he makes up for in his larger-than-life sounds."
"Humph!"
Mighty Tusks grunted with all the effort he could muster.
"He's still going to be a weak member of the herd. Just see to it that he doesn't annoy me."
And he waddled off across the sand with a display of arrogance befitting his physically domineering position. Mother Walrus felt indignant towards his rude comments regarding her son, but she was also concerned about Walrus's future position within the herd. A weak walrus had a lesser quality of life, and she wanted him to have many friends and wonderful relationships. Socializing with one another was always an important aspect of their daily lives. This was the way of the walruses. "Why doesn't Mighty Tusk like my sounds?" Walrus asked his mother. "Because he just doesn't know how to appreciate such beautiful music, my son," Mother Walrus told her beloved calf as she tenderly nuzzled him. Walrus couldn't keep from giggling as her whiskers brushed against his own extremely sensitive ones. "Oh, Walrus, you are experiencing this world in such unique ways," Mother Walrus said to her bundle of joy. "What do you mean?" Walrus asked. Life had always been an awesome adventure for him, and it was difficult to understand why anyone would not feel the same way. "Your vocal sounds are more resonant because they are filled with the wisdom of 1,000 walruses," she told her son. Walrus looked at his mother in bewilderment. "How am I more than one walrus?" he asked. "Don't worry, my dear. Someday you will understand who you really are, and on that day the sun will shine down upon the ocean with a brilliant light for all to see," Mother Walrus said as she nuzzled her calf once more before waddling over to visit the rest of the herd. Walrus didn't exactly understand his mother's words. He just knew that her voice made him feel warm and secure. But those feelings would wane as he grew older and his life grew more difficult. Over the years, he learned to suppress his sounds as his mother began receiving more and more complaints from other members of the herd. She always tried to ignore their negative statements, but Walrus was aware of how their attitude towards him was affecting her. He was slowly being pushed away from the herd as fewer and fewer members would socialize with him, and a lonely life for a walrus was no life at all. So one day, Walrus made the decision to go in search of a new herd, a herd to call home. He knew his mother belonged with the old herd, so he bid her a loving farewell. This was his journey to take by himself. All day and all night he swam the big blue ocean in search of a new herd. Tired from his search, Walrus found some nice soft sand on a new shore to rest upon, where he quickly fell into a deep sleep. The constant sound of the ocean surf merged into dreamtime images of waves of walruses gathering on a large beach. From the midst of their normal grunts, barks, and whistles arose an unearthly sound which captivated everyone and changed their tune. Walrus awoke with a heaviness in his heart. His loneliness was almost unbearable, and he wondered if he would ever find another herd. Then he heard a melodious sound that rang out from across the beach. He turned to see where this beautiful bellow was coming from, and to his great delight he saw another walrus perched on a large rock next to the shoreline. He quickly waddled over to the new walrus and introduced himself. "My name is Harmony," the lovely animal told Walrus. "Where did you come from?" she asked curiously. "My old herd lives far across the sea, but I am in search of a new herd," Walrus told his new friend as he sadly recalled the events which led to his departure. Harmony smiled at Walrus. "Well, it is said that everything happens for a reason, so perhaps there is a special purpose in your search for a new home." Walrus hoped she was right. He just wanted the pain of loneliness to leave his heart. "May I join your herd?" he politely asked. "Of course you may," she replied. "My herd always welcomes new friends." And she led Walrus to a place on the beach where hundreds of walruses were gathered close together. Walrus couldn't believe what he was seeing, nor what he was hearing. There were so many walruses, all rubbing and nuzzling one another, and each with unique vocal skills. Such an amazing sea of symphonic sound rang out far across the land, and each sound was perfectly blended with the others, as if everyone seemed to be singing the exact same song. "Here is the newest member of our herd," chimed Harmony as she introduced Walrus to his new friends. Walrus was initially worried about how well he would fit in with the new herd because of his misshapen tusks. But then he realized that many of his new friends also had lesser physical features. He wondered about the order of the new herd. "Who is the strongest member of your herd?" he asked Harmony. "Who is in control?" Harmony realized that Walrus didn't understand the ways of her herd as she smiled and explained. "He who is weakest is also strongest." Walrus was puzzled by her response, but he didn't have a chance to ask for further explanation. Harmony soon blended into the herd, leaving Walrus with that familiar and unwelcome feeling of loneliness. Soon, several members of the herd began approaching Walrus, anxious to meet and hear him. But whenever Walrus tried to use his special vocal skills he had been given at birth, nothing came out. "How could this have happened?" he muttered to himself. Walrus tried to convince his new herd of his unique vocal sounds, but they weren't concerned with his explanation. They just patiently began teaching him how to make their splendid music, and in no time, Walrus was able to sing harmoniously with the herd. And so it went on for many years until Walrus had learned all of the songs of his new herd. He also discovered how his misshapen tusks were actually an asset, as he could use them to skillfully gather clams on the ocean floor. His life was full of happiness. He was very comfortable. Then one day, his sounds were no longer in tune with the new herd. No matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't harmonize with them. I don't understand why I can't make music with everyone, he woefully told his friend Harmony. Perhaps there is disharmony because your own music needs to be played elsewhere, Harmony told him wisely. I thought I had found my permanent home. I had hoped that I would always belong to this new herd, Walrus said in a sad tone. Where will I go? Follow the ocean, and she will guide you to a herd to call home, Harmony said as she nuzzled her friend. But what if the next herd doesn't like me? Walrus wailed. I don't think I can handle the pain of rejection again. Walrus was feeling extremely insecure, and the pain in his heart was unbearable. He thought surely he was destined to become the loneliest walrus in the ocean. Walrus, Harmony began as she tenderly placed one of her flippers upon his, you must remember the gifts that Mother Earth has given to all walruses. It is part of our nature to be social creatures. We are naturally able to make friends wherever the ocean leads us. While Harmony's words offer Walrus a great deal of comfort, it was tempered with the uneasiness of not knowing where the ocean would lead him or what difficulties he would encounter. What if he couldn't find another herd that understood him? But what if I can't harmonize with anyone? He poignantly asked Harmony. She smiled the smile of a dear friend who sincerely believed in all of her companion's abilities, even when they were consumed with a lack of confidence. Walrus, you have a special way of communicating. Let your thoughts be heard, and they will resonate with those who have ears to hear them. Walrus felt reassurance from her supporting words and comforting voice. He would remember her sounds into eternity. Such friendship was difficult to find among the ebbs and flows of the vast ocean waves. Her memory would shine like a pearl in his mind as he bravely set out for his next journey. And so Walrus bid a sad but loving farewell to Harmony as he plunged into the ocean in search of a herd to call home. He swam and swam as his heart filled with the uneasiness of leaving his comfortable lifestyle and his mind clouded with the doubts of his decision. Walrus felt very insecure, and he wished the waves would swallow him up. He was so overwhelmed by his feelings of hopelessness that he didn't notice the waves had suddenly grown violent. The winds were whipping and stirring the ocean into a ferocious frenzy of water. The air grew cold, and gray clouds filled the expanse of the sky. Walrus was tossed about the ocean, and he fought to maintain his breath. It was tempting to succumb to the waves and allow his body to sink to the bottom of the ocean floor. But his spirit was aware of the futility of such thoughts and urged him to fight back. The waves lashed out at Walrus as he fought to stay alive. Weakened from his fight, he closed his eyes and gave one last effort to swim against the current. A flash of words filled his mind as he swam with all his might. Follow the ocean, and she will guide you to a herd to call home. Walrus hoped that his dear friend Harmony was right. Perhaps the ocean was testing his will to have a herd to call home. He would prove to Mother Earth that his desire was strong, and he welcomed her difficult waves, refusing to let them defeat him. Eventually, Walrus was washed upon a shore with a familiar sand. Exhausted from his ordeal, he lay upon the beach with his eyes barely open, trying to regain his strength. The roar of the waves fell to a gentle, rhythmic cadence, while the clouds opened to a brilliant ray of light that almost blinded him. Then Walrus listened to the wind as it howled and hissed and spun all around his face. For a moment, Walrus forgot about his miseries and allowed his thoughts to ride on this mysterious wind. Gatherer of souls, Walrus heard the words as they plunged deeply into his mind, halting all other thoughts. He was somehow aware that this new thought was not his own, but there was a certain energy that these words carried, a feeling of warmth that Walrus could only associate with Mother Earth. It was her vibration that reminded him of Harmony's caring words, and it was also Mother Earth's compassion that guided him to accept the path he had traveled thus far and the one which existed beyond his inner vision. The wind stopped howling around his face, and the clouds quickly disappeared. The air was calm and fresh. The storm had passed, and Walrus wondered where the ocean had brought him. "Is it really you, my dear?" said a voice that brought Walrus a feeling of fond remembrance. Walrus turned around to see the loving face of his mother. She had aged much since their last time together. "Mother, I can't believe I found you!" Walrus cried out as he nuzzled her. "But this means that I've returned to the old herd. Why would the ocean bring me back to those who once rejected me?" Walrus was both excited to see his mother and disappointed to realize that his journey had returned him full circle. He was worried that he would not be able to use his beautiful vocal skills that he had learned to remember. But how could he live a life of silence? Having no voice was worse than having no herd. "Come, my son, let the old herd hear your music," Mother Walrus coaxed. "There have been many changes among us." And so Walrus followed his mother across the beach, where he soon saw waves and waves of walruses, some with familiar faces and some with new faces. The old feeling of insecurity began to rise up in Walrus's throat as he was greeted by the members of the old herd. But that feeling was soon replaced with excitement as he heard some of the songs of his heart. Their chorus was not as full-sounding as the herd he had just left, but Walrus felt happy to hear these notes. As he listened to their music, he couldn't help but sing with them, adding a great depth of sound which mesmerized the masses. Some of the familiar faces could remember how Walrus always sang such beautiful music, and they welcomed his enchanting melodies. "Your sounds are even stronger than when you were a calf," said a faintly familiar voice. Walrus looked over his shoulder to see a much older Mighty Tusks. His whiskers were gray, and his body showed the scars of defeat. He was no longer in charge of the herd. There was a gentleness in his eyes that Walrus had often seen in the faces of his past herd. "You are not offended by my vocal skills?" Walrus asked in search of assurance. "Life has graciously taught me how to be weak on the outside and strong on the inside," Mighty Tusk said. "My reward for having learned this lesson is the ability to have ears that can hear and discern the most beautiful sounds." "It has been a long and winding journey for me, but it's good to be home," Walrus told Mighty Tusk. "Sometimes the greatest journey in life is the one we take within ourselves," Mighty Tusk said. Walrus realized that the lessons learned by Mighty Tusks were also lessons for his benefit. He would never again allow his sounds to be stifled, nor would he ever ignore anyone else's music. And he knew that regardless of whatever herd he called home, he would always strive to enjoy the melodies and counter-melodies of the world.